I'm David Phillips. I've recently retired as Reader in Social Policy in the Department of Sociological Studies, University of Sheffield, where I worked for 35 years, mostly teaching social research, introduction to social studies, and courses on quality of life and well-being. I first heard about Opus Hatch through a friend of mine called Tom Donaldson, who was a student in the department in 1989. He was a member of a small course there where at the end of the course the students hadn't done enough reading. So we met each month for a seminar in a pub to carry on doing some of the reading. And that's carried on from 1989 to 2012. They still haven't got through the reading list. But one night when Tom was going for a drink, Karen had contacted him and asked to talk to him about the Opus Hatch project, as he was a social scientist. And he said, well, come along, because I'm having a drink with some other social scientists. Karen came along, and I got fascinated, and that developed my interest. Obviously, a lot of it's to do with technology, but that to me was a sort of side issue once I read the script. The first thing that hit me very much was the notion of disembodiment. The idea that people's identities can be separate from their physical, visceral bodies. And that's particularly interesting in terms of disability, and I was delighted that disability came into the play, because people on the web, their identities can be different to their identities in real life. I've got a close friend who's got cerebral palsy, who's very difficult to talk to, because his communication is problematic, and because he's in a wheelchair, and his body is very twisted a lot of the time. And I've become a very close friend of him, but I know when people meet him initially, their first reaction is not, hey, this is a great guy who's incidentally got 2 master's degrees and an undergraduate degree, but here's somebody who's disabled. And on the web, Jonathan doesn't have those disabilities, and seeing people's identity outside their bodies is really important. First thing. Second thing is kind of incidental. There's a few hints, particularly from the TrollNet people, about once you get somebody's identity, once somebody's identity has actually been transferred into cyberspace, they become immortal. And this is something which the whole history of science fiction literature is about, people searching for immortality. And the background of that is sort of a hint of immortality. So that's the second thing to me, which I think people coming away from the play will be thinking, oh my goodness, if this is possible, this could transform our notion of legacy and inheritance. Third thing which came across very nastily and very, very visibly to me was the idea of thought control. I'm doing an undergraduate course at the moment in 20th century history at the Open University. I'm just in the middle of writing an essay on Hitler and propaganda. And today, watching through the rehearsal, I was thinking, oh my goodness, there's so much here which is to do with trying to control people's thoughts. And this context is trying to control people's thinking in order to be engaged in getting them to spend money and shop. But it's done politically as well, and so many societies use their propaganda to change people's perceptions of what's right and wrong, good and bad. I supervised a master's student who was doing a study of eating in Romania, and Ceausescu actually tried to make sure that everybody ate the same things, they saw the same things on TV, they listened to the same things on radio, they thought the same things. So thought control was the third thing that came through very much. The two most obvious things are the ones which I suppose emotionally got me very much, were the idea that last scene about the exercise of free will and how free will is essential to our notions of what is morally good and humane, and you can use free will for good or bad, but you have to have it. But the other thing, and this reminded me when I was a teenager, and I just was watching him create Opus Hatch and thinking, if I was a teenager or person in my 20s, if I went back to that age, there was so much about me that I was unhappy with, and this thing about interacting with people and being yourself. Get someone else to go and chat up the person you fancy. That would be an absolutely amazing thing to do. And this notion of being able to transfer your dream, your fantasy into the real world, it's taken me about 40 years to get even a tenth of the way down there. And thinking of a young person who is trying to develop who they are, to engage with other people, to actually have that dream and to live it in. I've been playing around with Second World recently. A lot of people live their dreams in Second World, which is very sad. And so there was a sort of poignancy about it. So those are the things which hit me immediately from it. The gradual, the big word for it, which I can't think of, transformation from Opus into a cardboard, not even a cardboard, from a caricature into a sentient being. And this is where the stuff I did on quality of life rang some bells on me. Aristotle always talked about leading a fruitful life and leading a meaningful life and not just getting pleasure. Opus Hatch started off being a pleasure seeker. And then through his very difficult conversations with Sarah, maybe conversation is the wrong word, confrontations with Sarah, something triggered in him, and it triggered also with Tony Solo that there was more to life than pleasure, and it was this development of conscience, of compassion, of empathy, of anger, of viciousness, and the sexist assault in a way was part of all that, which sort of took me up. Took me back. I was horrified and angry. I thought, why is this in this play? And then suddenly I thought, no, it's got to be there. And it's part of his growth into not just being, but becoming a person. Okay, there's two elements to this. One is the substantive and the other one's the procedural. The substantive one is about identity, well-being, subjective well-being, and our notion of what it is to lead the good life and to be a worthwhile person and lead a worthwhile life. There are so many connections all the way through the play with me on that, and I was thinking, oh yeah, there's this guy who talked about positive positive affect, negative affect, life satisfaction, and a feeling of joy as being the four elements to subjective well-being. And you could see that at the beginning Opus was concentrating on maximising his positive affect, his positive feelings, minimising his negative affect. But then he was starting to struggle towards satisfaction, and he didn't get joy. And I think the reason why one of the main reasons which precipitated him to delete himself, which is the ultimate act of altruism, I suppose, of self-immolation, if you can call deletion immolation, was because he realised that he didn't have that love, because the person he thought he loved wasn't a person, was a creation of this monster corporation. And that was very poignant to me in terms of that. The process, and that all ties in with so much of the theorising about what a good life is, and that it isn't just pleasure, satisfaction, happiness, or money. The money was actually a very big theme in the play, and quite rightly too, I think. But he was struggling away from all that, from expenditure, from pleasure, from Hawaiian shirts, towards trying to realise what it was to care for people. And that was a very important thing. And that links in with so much of the theoretical work on well-being, not just individually, but culturally too. I do a lot of work on social capital, social cohesion. And you can't get social capital without trust. And the fascinating thing, sorry, I get heavy and academic, I'm not careful here. The fascinating thing was, after the attempted double murder between, when they tried to kill each other, was the development of trust, and how you cannot, under any circumstances, get what I would call to be effective, positive social cohesion without people caring for each other and trusting each other. And that linked in nicely. The process side of it is actually very much more personal for me, because the most satisfaction I got from being an academic was, in fact, supervising PhDs, and I supervised about 32, 33 PhDs in the end. And I used to be a psychiatric social worker, and I used to be a psychiatric nurse before that. And those experiences helped me immensely in supervising students when they were doing very difficult, challenging things, enabling to see people as individuals, to facilitate them to empower themselves. And I found that started off with undergraduate dissertations and with a undergraduate course I took, which was a social research methods course, where I got students working in groups on projects for outside sponsors, and particularly international charities. And in the end, I got involved with taking students to West Africa through one of the projects which we've been engaged with. And those groups of students over the last 3 or 4 years when I was working, I took to Africa, have all got very involved working in the voluntary sector. I'm very close to them now as individuals. And all of that activity, which was sort of, let's say, the process, it didn't have to be a sociology department, it could have been any department that did empirical work, got me very committed to interactions with people and trying to enable them to develop themselves fully. And for a weird reason, when I was sitting in the back watching one of the scenes being rehearsed, it reminded me of that, the relationship between Opus and Freddie kind of had that thing where you mustn't tell people what to do. You've got to give them free will. You've got to enable them to use their free will, but at the same time try to facilitate them. And that one line where Freddie says, "I've been a bad father," was just really quite moving for me in relation to all that stuff. I'm spending quite a bit of time, as I pointed out right at the beginning, a couple of days a week with my 2-and-a-bit-year-old grandson. What's fascinating is watching a young child starting to learn the rules, where they can be cheeky, where they can push things a bit, where they know they mustn't go over the line. And in a way, Opus needed more of those rules and structures to enable him to develop. And I think the notion of him starting off as being somewhere a long way along the autistic spectrum, and then being less and less autistic, more and more Asperger, and then getting very angry, and then suddenly asking Sarah about love was one of the most difficult things anyone could actually do, to ask someone else, particularly someone else. Particularly if you're a man asking a woman about that. And he was both angry, offensive, and hurt at the same time in that relationship with her, in that confrontation with her, which I thought was very, very real in terms of the way in which we get socialized. This goes right back to the very first thing I said, in terms of our human identity and in terms of how we define ourselves. And he was trying to define himself within the world of Amazon and Facebook and having lots and lots of friends and what have you. So that was fascinating.